Mr. President, thanks for having us here. And it's a very important moment because UN Security Council just approved at unanimity a resolution asking Syria to eliminate completely its chemical weapons. Are you going to comply with this?
Actually, we join the international agreement for preventing the use and acquirement of chemical weapons before that resolution came to light. The main part of the Russian initiative based on our will to do so. So it's not about the resolution, actually it's about our will. Of course, we have the will because in 2003 we had a proposal in the United Nations, in the Security Council, to get rid of those weapons in the Middle East, to have a chemical weapon free zone in the Middle East. So of course we have to comply. This is our history, to comply with every treaty we sign.
So with no limit to any extent?
According to every chapter in the agreement, we don't have any reservation. That's why we decided to join the agreement.
How do you think you will organize this kind of dismantling, which is very complicated?
This question should be directed to the organization itself, because our role is to offer the data and to facilitate their procedures, which is available so far. But I think it's about the technical side or aspect of the implementation, about how to reach those places, especially when you have terrorists could put any obstacle, and about how to dismantle and get rid of those materials.
Let me just speculate on this. It means that you're going to help them and protect them, because now security is a very important issue here in Syria.
Of course, that's self-evident, yes.
And let's go forward, Mr. President, trying to understand what's going on in Syria in the next few days, weeks and months, because now the attack, which was very close a few weeks ago, looks to be a little more distant. How are you going to work in this time? What is your personal roadmap?
For what, sorry?
For political activities. I mean, how do you think you're going to use this time?
Since the beginning of the crisis, we said political activity or solution, whatever you call it, is a very important part of the crisis. But when you have terrorism, you cannot expect the political solution to solve everything. In spite of that, you have to continue the political action. It's about the Syrians meeting around the table, discussing the political system that they want, the future of Syria. And whatever they agree upon, you'll have a referendum in order to have the endorsement of the Syrian people regarding whatever part of the future of Syria, whether it's constitution or laws or whatever. That's what we've been doing since the beginning of the crisis, and this is the same action that we're going to continue with in the meantime.
We will go back later to the beginning of the crisis, but let us stay for a second on this. It means that you're going to discuss with the opposition as well, even with the armed opposition?
When they are armed, you don't call them opposition, you call them terrorists. Opposition is a political entity, is a political program, is political vision. This is opposition. If you have arms and destroy and kill and assassinate, this is not opposition. This is what you call terrorism all over the world in every country. So we can discuss with every party in the opposition regarding the militants. If they give in their arms, we'll be ready to discuss with them anything like any other citizen.
So we arrive close to Geneva II, the peace talks, because Ban Ki-moon, Secretary General of UN, said that very likely in November there will be a second Geneva meeting. Mm-hmm. Are you planning to attend it personally?
That depends on the framework of the Geneva meeting, because so far that conference is not clear. What kind of conference? Who's going to attend? What the criteria for this conference? So we have to be ready as government, but we cannot decide who's going to head the delegation until you have, let's say, the framework, the clear framework and the criteria.
So let me just ask you, which kind of framework would convince you to go there?
As I said, any political party could attend that conference, but we cannot discuss, for example, with Al-Qaeda offshoots, an organization that's affiliated to Al-Qaeda. So, for example, terrorists. We cannot negotiate with the people who ask for foreign intervention and military intervention in Syria.
May I just name Qatar and Saudi Arabia?
Let me be frank with you. They are client states. So I'm talking about states now. If we want to talk about states, they are client states. Their master is the United States. We all know that. So if the United States is attending, this is the main partner, and the others are accessories. If we want to talk about Syrian parties, regardless of their names, I'm talking about their behavior during the crisis. That's what we can discuss, their behavior.
Since the situation on the ground is very complicated, could you also accept the idea of some international forces of like interposition on the ground to try to stabilize in a way the situation?
It doesn't work because you're not talking about two countries fighting with each other, like for example Syria and Israel, where you have a front line, clear front line, where you can have United Nations forces on both sides of the borders or the frontier, let's say, or the armistice line. It's completely different. You are talking about gangs. They could exist everywhere in Syria, within any city, where you don't have frontier or clear lines. So even if you want to suppose that you can accept that idea, which is not acceptable for us, but if you want to accept it, where can you position those troops? No one can draw a map. You need a clear map. There is no clear map. There are gangs coming from everywhere, and they are terrorists, should be fought, not should be isolated from the Syrian troops.
We were discussing Geneva too, and I was thinking of Europe and Italy in particular as a potential partner of discussion. How do you see the role of Italy? Again,
let me be very bold here and very blunt. If we want to discuss the role of Italy, we should see it in the light of the European role. Is Italy independent from the European role? If not, who's leading the European role? And we have to discuss the relation between the European role with the American. Is Europe independent from American policies today? I heard from many European officials that they are convinced about what we are saying, but they cannot announce it. This is not the first time, not only during this crisis. So any role should be looked at in the light of two things: the credibility of that role. Second, the relation between the individual or the country or the government, let's say, with the different parties. Now, our reality today, that most of the European countries adopted the American, let's say, practice in dealing with different countries since George Bush came to his position more than 10 years ago. When they have problem or disagreement with any country, they cut off all kind of relations. So if you want to play a role, how can you play a role where you don't have relation? How can you build credibility when you don't have relation? Regarding the credibility, how can you talk about the credibility of any European country now when they talk about the humanitarian aid, at the same time they established the worst embargo we've ever seen in Syria since the existence of Syria after the independence? Many things have to be discussed before asking for role. We welcome any role. We ask we support any country that would like to help the Syrians in their endeavor. But you cannot just ask for a role without having the foundation of that role. So, to be frank, Europe, most of the European countries today, they don't have the ability to play that role because they don't have the different factors that could make them succeed and could make them efficient and effective in playing that role.
But things look to change quite quickly these days because we just had this phone call among President Obama and Iranian President Rouhani, and so it looks like that the balance in the region in some way is changing. Isn't it going to affect in some ways what is happening in Syria?
I think it's going to affect it positively for many reasons. First of all, Iran is our ally. Second, because we trust the Iranians. Third, because the Iranians, like the Syrians, like many countries in the world, don't trust the Americans. And I think many of the American allies don't trust the American administrations. So for the Iranians to move closer to the Americans, it's not just a naive move. It's a well-studied step that's based on the experience of the Iranians with the United States since the revolution in 1979. But if the Americans are, let's say, honest about this rapprochement, I think the results will be positive regarding the different issues, not only the Syrian crisis, include every problem in the region.
You know that in the day of the crisis and in which the attack was so close, an important action was taken by Papa Francesco, Pope Francis, against the war. And now, speaking to the Christian minority here, they are all very scared. What is going to be your attitude towards minority like Christians in the next few years?
Syria is a melting pot, and it existed like this, like it is today, because it was a melting pot with multifarious cultures for centuries, before Christianity and after Christianity, before Islam and after Islam. If you have any dramatic change in the demographic and the social fabric of the Syrian society, you're going to have big problem in the future regarding the future of Syria. I don't know what kind of problem, because it's more complicated than anyone would think, and that will affect the other countries in the regions. So Syria is a secular country, and the Syrian society is secular society. Secular means deal with every citizen, regardless of its religion, sect, and ethnicities. So I think taking care of these minorities in Syria, especially the Christian, in light of what's been happening recently, burning churches, attacking Christian villages, expelling Christians from their houses and homes, in light of this, dealing with this crisis is not Syrian issue, it's not only a regional issue, it should be international issue, especially for Europe, and especially for Italy and for the Vatican.
So, Mr. President, these have been very complicated weeks, and the escalation started with the infamous 21st August attack. Can we go back to that allegation about chemical attack? Which is your version? Because you're speaking about having different evidences, UN inspectors are here working. Can you help us understanding which is your version about this?
Yeah. Let me tell you in brief first. Let's start by saying the Syrian army didn't use it at all. It never arranged to use chemical weapons during the crisis. And we have every evidence that the gangs have used this. Now, why the Syrian army didn't use it? Logically and realistically, you don't use it when you're in advancement. The army was advancing. Why to use it? You didn't use it for 2 years, for 2.5 years, while you had many difficult situations in different areas in Syria. You have much more terrorists facing you in other places, more than Damascus. Why didn't we use it? Why only in that place? Second, the story now, or the narrative, the American narrative, we invited the delegation to come to Syria, which is responsible of investigating the use of chemical weapons before that incident. And the day they arrived, the second day, the Syrian army used chemical weapons. Is that plausible? You cannot believe this story. Second, when we invited the delegation to come in March, why the American